So MacBook Air versus MacBook Pro is a decision that us MacBook users have been making for well over a decade. Is the cheaper, more lightweight, and less powerful Air all I need? Or should I pay a little bit extra and sacrifice some portability, but get more performance and other upgrades like increased port selection, better screen, and speakers? I thought the answer for me personally would be pretty straightforward, but after using both of these MacBooks side by side for the last few months, turns out I was wrong. So first up, before I even get to all the other differences, let's talk about price, the most important factor, right? So $999 for the M4 MacBook Air versus $1,599 for the M4 MacBook Pro. Now it does seem like a huge difference, but I actually didn't realize right away that the M4 MacBook Pro base model comes with a 512GB SSD versus 256GB on the Air, with of course an optional $200 upgrade to the 512. It also gets the non-binned Apple Silicon M4 chip with 10 GPU cores versus 8 GPU cores on the Air, with an optional $100 upgrade to 10. So realistically, once I took that into consideration, what was originally a $600 price difference between the two is more like $400, which, don't get me wrong, is still quite a lot, but I think it is enough to significantly improve the value proposition of the Pro, but importantly, only if those upgrades interest you in the first place. I mean, maybe you're perfectly fine with a 256GB SSD, for example. Also, if you're willing to go down the refurbished route, this price goes even lower to around $1,329. But on the flip side, I also regularly see the MacBook Air going on sale for just $850. So just be aware the exact pricing differences between the two can fluctuate. For port selection, I found the benefits of the M4 MacBook Pro's extra ports really depended on what I was frequently doing on the MacBook. The MacBook Pro, of course, has an extra USB-C port, and note that all the USB-C ports are the same Thunderbolt 4 speeds on both MacBooks, and it also has HDMI and an SD card slot. Now, some people say the extra ports are not a big deal, just use a USB-C hub on the MacBook Air instead, and that is true, but if I was frequently using the SD card slot with my camera, or connecting my MacBook via HDMI to my TV to play movies, not having to use a hub or adapter every single time was something I ended up really appreciating. It was nice just plugging things straight in and not having to dig around in my bag to find an SD card to USB-C adapter, for example. Also, that extra Thunderbolt 4 USB-C port on the MacBook Pro is on the right side, which gave me a little bit more flexibility when it came to connecting things to my Mac. Like plugging into my monitor, I can route the cable around the right side instead of having it stick out on the left, for example. Or when charging the MacBook Pro, I had the option of charging it from the other side if I wanted. Now, in terms of portability, I had several national and international trips with each of these MacBooks over the last few months. Now, their physical size is almost identical. There's only roughly about a 0.3 inch difference in their chassis when looking from the top. The MacBook Pro is, of course, slightly thicker than the Air, but I found there was usually no major difference in how they both fit into the laptop sleeve of my bag. But when my bag was packed super tight, I did notice the Air just seemed to slip in there a little bit easier. How much they weigh is really the only major difference in my opinion. The Pro is heavier by 0.7 pounds or 310 grams, and carrying it around in my bag all day long, this extra weight was not noticeable for me personally, but that does vary from person to person. If you're on the smaller side or your back gets sore easily, maybe it's something to consider. Speaking of sore backs, you might have seen some cats in the B-roll of this video, and don't get me wrong, I love them to bits, but they leave so much fur and mess on the ground, and I'm constantly bending over to clean it up. Luckily for me though, I have a little robot friend to help with that. And big thanks to Narwal for supporting my work on this channel and sponsoring this section of the video. This is the Narwal Freo Z10, an all-in-one ultra cleaning robot vacuum with a maintenance-free base station. The Freo Z10 takes the stress out of cleaning and is perfect for mid-sized to big houses, including those with pets and any humans with long hair. 15,000 pascal suction power is not only the most powerful out of robot vacuums in the same price range, but sucks 99% of mess, dust, and dirt into the vacuum. Its dual flow tangle-free system uses dynamic side brushes that flick back and forth and a floating roller brush to naturally prevent tangles without manual detangling. When mopping, the mop pad's 4-layer design not only holds more water, but absorbs more dirty water from the floor to clean more effectively. The mop pad also extends out and swings to get up close to the edges and under any furniture. Once the cleaning process is complete, the robot vacuum returns to its base station to charge, empty the dustbin, and clean the mop pads at up to 167 degrees. This all-in-one base station also cleans itself, so you don't need to empty it for up to 120 days. The Narwal Freo Z10 is currently on sale, so check the link in the description to get the best price. Now, one advantage of the MacBook Pro's thicker chassis is there's now enough room to fit a better speaker system. It's a high-fidelity 6-speaker sound system with force-canceling woofers versus the standard 4-speaker sound system on the MacBook Air. Now, there is absolutely no comparison here. The MacBook Air sounds like a cheap, tinny set of $20 speakers compared to the Pro's speakers. The Pro has clearer soundstage, significantly more bass, and kind of just fills the entire room like a larger dedicated speaker would. Here's a little audio test to try and show the difference. Now, what many people don't realize about the MacBook Air is that although it's marketed as a 13-inch screen, it's actually 13.6 inches versus the MacBook Pro's 14.2. So realistically, the MacBook Pro's screen is only 0.6 inches larger, not a full inch as the names would suggest. And using them side by side, I actually found it quite difficult to find any meaningful differences in screen real estate. I noticed some websites and workflows would show a bit more on the 14-inch. For example, I'd be able to see slightly more information in a table without having to scroll over, or the beginning of the next section of a text article down the bottom. But it was nowhere near as noticeable as, say, going from a 14-inch MacBook Pro to a 16-inch. The Air is also using the older Liquid Retina display panel, which is LCD versus Mini LED on the Pro. So on the Pro, colors just seem to pop more and look more vibrant. And also darker scenes look better because the LEDs are actually able to switch off completely versus the LCD display using backlights. HDR is also better and brighter on the Pro, but overall, I didn't find these things to be a deal breaker. Now, I also noticed that the Nano-Texture display upgrade is not available on the MacBook Air. Only the Pro has the option. Now, I don't typically use my MacBook in super bright environments, like outside in the sun, for example, but when I tested the Nano-Texture versus the standard glossy panel, it actually cut down on reflections and glare significantly while also not impacting text sharpness or colors at all. It may not seem like this is the case when looking at the footage I'm putting on the screen, but I'm trying to intentionally show the Nano-Texture effect here. So these are kind of extreme examples. If you put them side by side in a room with no bright light sources shining on the screen, then yeah, text sharpness and colors are actually identical despite what some people might tell you. The MacBook Pro screen also gets noticeably brighter, 1000 nits on the Pro versus 500 nits on the Air. Now, this does not mean the Pro screen gets twice as bright. The nits value increases logarithmically, not linearly. So the actual difference is more like the MacBook Pro screen can get about 20 to 25% brighter than the Air. I found the only scenario that this was useful, to me at least, was in outdoor environments or extremely bright locations, like sitting with my back against a bright window, for example. In 95% of indoor locations, I found the MacBook Air's maximum screen brightness was plenty for me. But yeah, if you frequently use your MacBook in bright locations, the MacBook Pro's 1000 nit peak brightness paired with the Nano-Texture display is seriously a god tier upgrade. As an absolutely insane, not at all indicative of real life test, I was actually in the middle of Death Valley, which is a desert 2 hours out of Las Vegas. And I pulled out my MacBook Pro just to see what the experience would be like. And I could clearly see the screen even while wearing polarized sunglasses, which is something I have never been able to do before, and it really blew me away. Now, ProMotion is of course another difference in the screen. The MacBook Pro can dynamically change its screen refresh rate up to 120 Hertz. Now this results in really smooth scrolling and mouse cursor movements, and in contrast, the MacBook Air screen is 60 Hertz. And while I personally prefer ProMotion, I didn't find that it was a deal breaker for the MacBook Air. Realistically, I spend 90% of my time on a laptop writing or reading static pages like emails or text documents, or watching YouTube videos or Netflix, which typically streams at around 30 FPS, or, other tasks that simply don't take advantage of high refresh rates. That being said, if you use your 60 Hertz MacBook Air with an external monitor that has a higher refresh rate, like this 120 Hertz Dell monitor, the difference is very noticeable and a bit unpleasant in my experience. So just keep that in mind, and do watch my review of that Dell monitor if you want more detail. Now, in terms of performance, there are going to be some differences between the two, despite the fact that they technically have the same Apple Silicon chip, assuming the MacBook Air has that optional 10-core GPU upgrade. Firstly, for those everyday tasks I spend most of my day doing, there was no difference, right? Like even in the more intense tasks like exporting Lightroom photos or rendering something, the differences were very minor as long as the specific demanding task was under a couple of minutes. The reason for this limitation is that the MacBook Air does not have a fan, right? It's passively cooled, versus the MacBook Pro, which does have a fan. So what happens is that after a few minutes, the MacBook Air's heatsink becomes saturated with heat and can no longer extract heat away from the chip. So performance gets throttled in the form of less wattage or power going to the CPU and GPU cores, which reduces the clock speed and as a result reduces overall performance. Now the MacBook Pro's fan is able to keep the chip sufficiently cooled so that it can run at pretty much 100% indefinitely with no throttling. Interestingly enough, I found that in CPU intensive tasks like compiling code, there was either only mild throttling or none at all, and performance was actually very similar. It seems that it's mainly the GPU cores on the MacBook Air that struggle when at full tilt for more than a few minutes. It's also important for me to clarify the MacBook Air can still get everything done the same as on the MacBook Pro, just that it sometimes might take a bit longer. And I thought that some of these differences would extend into the battery life, because on paper, the MacBook Pro has a significantly larger battery compared to the Air. But the Pro has all of these extra things that constantly draw power, right? Like the internal fan, the slightly larger screen that gets brighter and also has a higher refresh rate, additional and higher quality speakers, etc. So I actually didn't find a significant difference when using them. And honestly, when I'm getting 13 to 15 hours of mixed usage per charge on both laptops, that is more than enough, and anything over that just doesn't matter to me. So which one is best? Well, I think if you're deciding between these two, you should start with the MacBook Air as the default option. The Air is, incredible value, super portable, give you either identical or similar performance to the Pro, depending exactly what you're doing, of course, and is also quite a bit cheaper. And sure, look, it compromises in several areas compared to the Pro, like speakers or screen, but it's not like those things suck on the MacBook Air. They're still pretty good. I think the MacBook Pro really has to sell itself to you in a certain way to convince you to spend more money on it. For example, if you work in an office and constantly plug your MacBook in via HDMI to give presentations, and maybe you also work in direct sun a lot, so need a really bright screen. Or maybe you spend a lot of time doing tasks that are slightly too demanding for the Air, but are not demanding enough for the much more expensive M4 Pro MacBook Pro. And perhaps you also listen to music from the speakers a lot and prefer a higher refresh rate screen. If you can't see yourself specifically taking advantage of either some or all of those things, I think the MacBook Pro is a tough upsell compared to the Air. But at the end of the day, I really don't think you can go wrong with either one.